Hey guys, tonight we step into the fluorescent glow of Moscow's restless nights, a place where money doesn't just move in wallets, but ripples through the air like static. Neon signs blink above late-night kiosks. The river reflects cold light off the embankments, and in the shadow of all that electricity stands a man known less for his laughter than for the quiet way he counts. Not coins, not paper, but currents of value. Flows that never stop, tides that keep the underworld in balance. You probably won't survive this kind of life. It's not about brute force or even luck, but about living in a storm of trust and betrayal, with ledgers sharper than knives. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, drop a quick note in the comments with your location and your local time. I'd love to know where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The streets at this hour are slick with winter drizzle, headlights stretching into the dark. He knows which corners host the gamblers, which doors hide the cash counters. For Leonid Bilunov, the city is not just scenery, but an ecosystem of risk and reward. Each neon flicker is a reminder of a debt unpaid, each shadow a possible client or rival. In these hours, Moscow feels like a machine running on caffeine and suspicion, and he positions himself as its banker, not of institutions, but of loyalties. Money arrives in whispers, briefcases set down in back seats, figures noted quickly, and passed to men whose names rarely appear on documents. The mainstream fact is that in the early 2000s, Moscow really did see a wave of new wealth. Oil, trade, and sudden privatization created fortunes overnight. But closer to him, the fact is simpler. Every ruble that passes through his hand belongs twice, once to the man who earned it, and once to the group that demands it. Jokes still bubble up, even here. Someone once teased him that he could calculate compound interest faster than he could button his coat. He smirked, not denying it, because in a city like this, numbers are warmth. But there's another kind of joke too, like the one that Moscow's street lamps are the only honest ones in town because they never take a cut. He watches, counts, and never forgets. Do you remember the day he left with the first money? That sense of stepping across a line that could never be erased. Neon still reflects in his eyes as the night deepens, and the city exhales smoke and steam around him. The boyhood streets are narrower in his memory, lined with crumbling plaster and queues that felt endless. Leonid Bilunov grows up where the sound of ration cards tearing means dinner, and a miscalculated purchase means going hungry. He watches his mother stretch flour and sugar as if they were elastic, and he notices how his father keeps a tiny notebook, marking every ruble spent on shoes, candles, or a bus ride. That small book, thin as a prayer pamphlet, becomes his first real textbook. Numbers do not lie. They keep track of the truth when words become political slogans. In the late Soviet years, Moscow schools still run lessons on Marx and Engels, but Leonid memorizes equations instead. Multiplication tables stick faster than party slogans. Teachers scold him for daydreaming, but what he sees is a world where balance sheets matter more than speeches. He learns that scarcity can be measured, and that whoever controls the measurement controls the feeling of hunger or plenty. A mainstream fact from the time. By the 1980s, the Soviet economy is visibly slowing. Shortages of basic goods, meat, shoes, even soap, become part of daily life. Long queues snake around blocks, sometimes forming before dawn. But closer to him, the fact is smaller, almost intimate. He is the one in line with his mother, counting how many minutes until the store might run out, and calculating odds like a bookmaker in training. If 20 people wait and the delivery truck holds only 15 chickens, he knows he better charm the grocer or return home empty-handed. At school, a math teacher once jokes that Leonid has the soul of an accountant, though in those years the word accountant doesn't carry prestige. He shrugs, secretly pleased, because he already feels safer with numbers than with promises. A childhood friend tries to trade toys, but Leonid insists on fair value. 2 toy soldiers for a truck? Never one. When teased, he retorts with a grin. Check the balance sheet. Children laugh, but he's serious, and he keeps tally marks on scraps of paper long after the play ends. Many people still think that children shaped by scarcity either cling to thrift forever or rebel into reckless indulgence. So what do you think? In Leonid's case, thrift becomes his fortress. He keeps coins in jars labeled by week, then by month, long before banks teach him interest. His obsession grows like ivy, wrapping every choice. There are sensory snapshots he never loses. The smell of damp wool in stairwells, the bite of cold air on hands too small to carry heavy shopping bags, the taste of watered-down soup seasoned with little more than bay leaves. In all of it, he finds patterns. When deliveries arrive, which neighbors cheat at queues, which kiosks trade favors for bribes. Even at 10 years old, he begins to see that money, or the promise of it, is a skeleton key. Years later, when he will handle stacks big enough to suffocate a man, he still remembers those brittle ruble notes he once guarded in a cloth pouch under his pillow. They crinkled differently from today's glossy bills, and to him, they sounded like reassurance, each crease echoing, "You are prepared, you are ready." The city around him grows, shifts, and promises progress, but Leonid never forgets the ledger of his boyhood. It is written not only in numbers, but in hunger, patience, and a sharp eye for odds. And every time he touches a bundle of cash in adulthood, he remembers the way his father's notebook looked. Ink fading, pages fragile, but truth recorded without apology. The world he knows unravels fast. The Soviet Union collapses, and with it go the rules that once defined his childhood arithmetic. Factories close, shelves empty, and suddenly new words flood the language. Privatization, vouchers, reforms. For Leonid Bilunov, the 1990s arrive like a carnival where the rides are dangerous and the tickets are printed in chaos. He watches men in cheap suits stand outside metro stations with stacks of vouchers, buying them for bottles of vodka or for nothing at all. Families desperate for cash sell their shares of massive factories without knowing they've handed over entire industries. Leonid studies these transactions not with outrage but with fascination. Value is leaking everywhere, like water through broken pipes, and someone has to build the buckets. A mainstream fact, the voucher privatization program between 1992 and 1994 gave every Russian citizen a voucher representing a share of the national economy. Yet most people, unfamiliar with markets, sold theirs cheaply, leading to the rise of the oligarchs. Closer to Leonid, the fact is sharper. He sees his neighbor hand over a voucher for a box of imported cigarettes, thinking he's made a fair trade, while across the street, another man quietly amasses controlling stakes in factories. Leonid experiments too. He trades his family's voucher not for vodka, but for shares in a small cooperative bakery. The bakery fails within months, but he learns more from that failure than from school. He realizes that the paper itself was never the point. The flow of paper, the speed of exchange, that's where fortunes bloom. Many people joke about the time. They say everyone became a capitalist overnight, except nobody knew what capital was. Leonid laughs with them, but behind the humor, he feels a rising certainty. If he can understand these flows faster than others, he can survive the storm. At night, Moscow's streets look different. Neon still buzzes, but storefronts advertise Western brands: Coca-Cola, Levi's, Marlboro. Imported goods flood kiosks, often smuggled or stolen, and cash circulates with no oversight. He begins helping acquaintances convert rubles into dollars, hiding the bundles under car seats and ferrying them to makeshift offices. He's not yet the black banker, but the rhythm is starting. Money enters one pocket and must leave from another, faster and cleaner than before. The closer detail. One winter evening, he walks through a half-empty department store, shelves stripped bare except for a row of imported calculators. He buys one, not for the novelty, but for the sense of control. At home, he punches in numbers until dawn, learning the feel of percentages, imagining what might happen if he handled not hundreds, but millions. That night, the calculator clicks louder than the wind outside, and he knows his path will not be through brute force, but through precision. Many people still think that the 1990s in Russia were lawless improvisations, but Leonid senses structure beneath the madness. He asks himself, who creates that structure, and how do they profit? His answer is not simple, but it guides him into darker rooms, towards circles where numbers are guarded as fiercely as guns. And so, out of the wreckage of the Soviet collapse, Leonid discovers his craft. The storm of privatization teaches him that opportunity isn't about what you own, but about how you measure, move, and multiply. Every voucher, every failed bakery, every hurried deal by the metro feeds into the lesson. The fall is not an end. For him, it is the beginning. The first real brush comes quietly. A friend of a friend calls him one evening, asking if he can hold something overnight. Leonid Bilunov hesitates only a moment before agreeing. When the visitor arrives, it is not a gift or groceries, but a sealed envelope, thick, heavy, and wrapped in silence. He places it in the bottom drawer of his desk, locks it, and spends the night staring at the key. The next day, the envelope is collected without a word, and the man who takes it nods once, as if stamping approval on a test Leonid didn't know he was taking. That is how the obshchak touches him first. The communal fund of the Vory is not a myth. It is a mechanism. Everyone contributes, everyone benefits, and everyone fears what happens when it goes missing. For Leonid, handling that envelope is like being drafted into a fraternity older and stricter than any university could invent. He feels the weight not just of money, but of an oath, invisible yet binding. Mainstream history shows that in the 1990s, organized crime in Russia swelled into a parallel economy, its obshchaks fueling bribes, protection rackets, and internal justice. But closer to Leonid, the fact is simpler. His own hands now carry that economy. He is no longer an observer of chaos, but a custodian of it, if only for a night. From then on, errands multiply. He is asked to calculate, to tally, to confirm. His neat handwriting and his habit of never losing a receipt make him useful. At first, he thinks of it as temporary work, a side stream alongside other ventures. Yet the more he accepts, the more he realizes the stream has no end. Every calculation ties him deeper. Every signature places him on maps, drawn by men with tattoos on their knuckles. One evening in a smoky cafe, A senior figure leans close and jokes, "You write faster than most of us drink. Maybe we should call you our little accountant." The table laughs, and Leonid joins, though he feels the heat of recognition. He knows nicknames in this world are not casual. They are tests, and they stick. Many people still think that joining the Obshchak is about violence, that blood initiations mark the passage. Yet for men like Leonid, the initiation is quieter. A drawer locked overnight, a ledger balanced to the ruble, a reputation that spreads because mistakes never do. So what do you think? Does trust built on silence weigh heavier than trust built on fear? In time, he begins to notice the other side. With every favor, the line between personal freedom and communal duty thins. If someone is arrested, the Obshchak pays. If a widow weeps, the Obshchak provides. If a boss demands, the Obshchak delivers. And if Leonid stumbles, the Obshchak punishes. He feels both pride and caution, knowing that his skill with numbers now binds him to codes older than him, harsher than law, yet steadier than government. He recalls the night he first locked that drawer, hearing footsteps in the stairwell and imagining police knocking. His heart pounded, not from fear of arrest, but from fear of failure. It is a rhythm that will follow him for years, the sound of his own pulse as he balances other men's fates in his columns. The envelope was only the beginning, but in his mind, it remains a symbol. The weight of folded bills sealed in cheap paper becomes the cornerstone of his new life. From then on, every deal, every transfer, every hidden sum is just another envelope waiting for him to prove worthy of the trust placed in silence. Ghost companies sprout like weeds after rain. In the early 2000s, Moscow becomes a place where offices exist only on paper, with brass plaques rented by the hour and phone numbers that ring in empty rooms. Leonid Bilunov learns quickly how these shadows breathe. Cyprus firms appear as if conjured from the Mediterranean mist, staffed by lawyers who never ask questions, who promise confidentiality with the smoothness of polished marble. For the right fee, an entire corporation can be born without ever hiring a single worker. He sits in cramped kitchens, smoke curling above teacups, listening to men explain how a crate of goods can vanish in paperwork, yet reappear in profit. He realizes that these shells are more than escape routes. They are mirrors. Money goes in, changes its costume, and comes out clean enough to sit at any table. What fascinates him most is not the fraud, but the design. The way systems meant for trade can be bent into instruments of secrecy. The mainstream fact is clear. In the 1990s and early 2000s, offshore jurisdictions like Cyprus, the British Virgin Islands, and Panama became major channels for Russian wealth. Billions fled domestic banks to seek stability abroad. Closer to Leonid, the fact feels more personal. He holds receipts stamped with names of companies he knows do not exist. Yet those receipts command more respect than his own passport. A joke makes its way around his circle. Cyprus has more Russians than seagulls. He laughs, not only because it's funny, but because each seagull, like each company, looks the same from a distance, but hides its own hunger. Many people still think that these mechanisms are complicated, reserved for experts. But Leonid discovers their real secret. They thrive on simplicity. A signature here, a transfer there, and the illusion is complete. The paperwork isn't complex. It's convincing. And convincing, in his world, is priceless. He remembers one evening when a partner hands him a binder, heavy with contracts and languages he doesn't speak. The man says, "Don't worry about the words, just watch the flows." And so he does. He traces the numbers like a detective following footprints through snow, each step leading not to a door, but to another shell, another mailbox, another account. By dawn, he knows that money does not sleep. It only migrates. Closer still, Leonid once attends a meeting in a shabby Moscow office where the furniture wobbles and the carpet smells of dust. Yet on paper, that address belongs to an international trading giant moving millions across borders. He sits there, sipping weak coffee, and marvels at the theater. Outside, buses rattle past, unaware that the room holds more invisible wealth than the entire street combined. The Obshchak notices too. They value not just his discretion, but his fluency in this shadow language. A man who can shepherd money across borders without drawing attention is rarer and perhaps more powerful than the men who carry pistols. Leonid becomes a bridge, and bridges are dangerous but necessary. The shells, the shadows, the seagull jokes, all of it teaches him that in the new Russia, survival is not about muscle or bravado. It is about being able to point at nothing and make others believe they see something. The first time Leonid Bilunov walks into a counting room, he feels the weight of a new vocabulary. It isn't filled with voices, not really. It hums with the mechanical shuffle of bills through machines, the rhythmic snap of rubber bands stretched across stacks, and the low murmur of men comparing tallies. The air smells faintly of ink and dust, the scent of paper that has passed through too many hands. This is not a bank lobby with marble floors and tellers. It is a basement with bare bulbs, and yet it feels like the heart of Moscow's secret economy. Bundles line the tables and columns, neat as soldiers on parade. He is told to check totals, to confirm that inflow matches outflow. He doesn't hesitate. His fingers move with the same calm they did years ago when his father's notebook taught him thrift. He writes numbers in a clean hand, never smudging, never crossing out. Those watching see more than accuracy. They see trust. The mainstream fact is that in early 2000s Russia, cash circulation was enormous. Credit systems were weak, bank trust was thin, and organized groups relied heavily on cash-based transactions. Closer to Leonid, the fact is even more vivid. Every stack in that room represents not only wealth but also promises, favors, and debts carried by men whose loyalty is measured in envelopes, not contracts. At one point, a courier drops a bag so heavy it thuds like a body. Leonid notes the amount, counts swiftly, and ties it off again. Someone jokes that he should charge by the calorie burned in lifting it. Laughter ripples, short and nervous, but Leonid doesn't break rhythm. He knows mistakes are dangerous. Accuracy is his armor, his shield against suspicion. Many people still think that these counting rooms were chaotic free-for-alls, piles of money spilling without order. So what do you think? In truth, they were temples of discipline. For all their illegality, they ran on rules stricter than some banks. Leonid learns to respect that order, to see it as the scaffolding of the entire underworld. One winter night, he notices how the machines pause when the electricity flickers. In the silence, the men glance at each other, and for a moment the entire empire feels fragile, balanced on the thinnest wire. Then the light steadies, the machines resume, and the men exhale. Leonid doesn't forget that pause. It reminds him that all this power is still dependent on currents of both electricity and trust. He also begins to notice the sounds. The clicking of counters, the stretching of rubber bands, the soft thump as a finished bundle joins its row. Those noises become his lullaby, his reassurance that the system works as long as he keeps up. Later, when others remember gunfire or police raids, He will remember that steady percussion, as comforting as rain on glass. By the time dawn breaks over Moscow, he has already balanced more rubles than most citizens will ever see in a lifetime. He climbs out of the basement into the cold air, his pockets empty, but his role solidifying. He isn't rich, not yet. What he carries away is reputation, the man who never miscounts, never misplaces, never misunderstands the language of paper. That basement is not just a workplace. It is his crucible, the place where his identity as the black banker begins to harden. It begins with whispers and smoke. Men sitting in late-night cafes, tapping ash into chipped saucers, start calling him by a name that is both joke and warning. The black banker. At first, Leonid Bilunov laughs it off, insisting he is no banker, no black mark, just a man who can count. But the nickname spreads faster than the truth ever could. Soon it follows him into meetings, into phone calls, even into the silence before a deal. Nicknames in this world are not decorations. They are stamps. They tell others what role you play, how much you can be trusted, and where you must not step. The black banker becomes shorthand for reliability, for secrecy, for a man who won't flinch when asked to process numbers too large to say aloud. It is also a reminder that he does not belong to himself anymore. Once the underworld names you, you cannot scrape it off. The mainstream fact. Russian organized crime has a long tradition of nicknames, each carrying meaning inside the fraternity of Vory Vizakone. From Shliapa to Dead Hassan, names could define status or create legends. Closer to Leonid, the fact is smaller but sharper. He overhears a younger courier whisper, "The banker," with awe, as if Leonid were already a myth. That moment tells him the nickname has stuck harder than any ink. At a gathering in a jazz-lit bar, someone raises a glass and says, "To the black banker, may his ledgers never bleed." Laughter rises, and Leonid forces a smile, though inside he wonders if laughter will someday become accusation. Humor lingers in these places like smoke. Someone adds that if banks ever collapse, he'll be the one issuing rubles from his briefcase. Leonid chuckles, but the idea feels too close to reality. Many people still think that nicknames are earned through violence, through knife fights and prison scars. So what do you think? In Leonid's case, it is calculation that crowns him. His violence is invisible, hidden in numbers that decide who gets paid, who eats, who vanishes. The code recognizes this as power, and power, once named, cannot be denied. The closer detail is one night when a courier hesitates, refusing to hand over a bag without seeing Leonid himself. The banker has to take it, he insists, or it doesn't count. Leonid stands there, surprised that his presence now validates transactions. He accepts the bag, weighs it in his hand, and feels the burden of identity harden. It is no longer about counting money. It is about embodying trust. From then on, the name precedes him. Doors open, conversations quiet when he enters, and eyes measure him as if he carries ledgers inside his coat. The black banker is not just a man. He is a role in the machinery of Moscow's underworld. Leonid understands that roles can be prisons, but he also understands they can be fortresses, and so he carries the name, heavy but useful, knowing that every joke, every whisper, every toast in dim bars cements his place in the story. The tension between code and market becomes the axis of his nights. On one side stands the Vory's tradition, rules etched into prison walls, a brotherhood demanding loyalty above ambition. On the other side swells the new Russian economy, restless, hungry, flooded with opportunity. Leonid Bilunov straddles the two worlds, ledger in one hand, calculator in the other, trying to feed both without starving either. In smoky apartments where old thieves gather, he listens to voices hardened by decades in camps. They remind him that the obshchak is sacred, that money must serve the brotherhood before it serves the self. They frown at words like interest or profit, preferring to speak of duty, of respect, of hierarchy. Yet outside those rooms, in Moscow's neon avenues, businessmen in tailored suits measure success in percentages, in returns, in dividends, a mainstream fact. In the early 2000s, Russia saw a growing divide between traditional criminal codes and the rise of semi-legitimate businessmen with underworld ties. Some Vory clung to the old laws, while others embraced market logic. Closer to Leonid, the fact is embodied in a single night. He sits at a table with one man quoting prison etiquette and another calculating margin spreads, and both stare at him to settle the argument. He jokes, lightly, that perhaps money speaks both dialects. The room laughs, tension easing, but Leonid knows the truth. Sooner or later, someone will demand that he choose. Humor can only buy so much time. Many people still think that men like him abandoned the old codes completely once the economy opened. But in reality, Leonid keeps one foot on each side. He cannot betray the obshchak, not without losing the very shield that protects him. And yet, he cannot ignore the market's rhythm, not if he wants to grow, to expand beyond envelopes and basements. So what do you think? Can a man serve two masters if both pay in cash? The closer detail. Leonid once receives a call from a senior VOR asking him to freeze a sum that, by market sense, should be invested immediately. He hesitates, calculating lost profit. Then he complies. Later, in a different meeting, a businessman scolds him for wasting opportunity. Leonid shrugs, saying only, "The code writes interest in a different ink." That line spreads quietly, a paradox wrapped in wit, and soon others repeat it with a smile, though none know if he means it as loyalty or sarcasm. The duality shapes his reputation. To some, he is proof that tradition can adapt without breaking. To others, he is a reminder that the old code is bending too far. To Leonid himself, it is simply survival. He counts for the brotherhood, but he calculates for himself, forever aware that numbers cannot remain still any more than Moscow's restless neon can stop flickering. Jazz curls through the night like smoke. In a dim Moscow bar with brass railings and a cracked stage, Leonid Bilunov finds his favorite kind of meeting place, loud enough to blur words, soft enough to catch intent. The saxophone weaves slow notes over the clink of glasses and around small tables. Men lean close to talk business that no receipt will ever record. Deals come dressed in laughter here. A courier arrives with news, masked as a joke about late trains. An importer describes his troubles with customs, framed as a funny story about missing luggage. Between each anecdote, numbers slip across the table, written on napkins that will vanish before morning. Leonid listens more than he speaks, nodding, jotting, adjusting figures in his head as easily as others hum along with the music, the mainstream fact. In the post-Soviet era, Moscow nightclubs and restaurants became unofficial boardrooms, places where businessmen, politicians, and underworld figures mingled in relative safety. Many contracts were sealed with vodka rather than ink. Closer to Leonid, the fact is more intimate. He sits in a corner booth, calculating quietly, while a saxophonist's solo covers the weight of decisions worth millions. Someone teases him once, raising a glass. "Careful, banker, don't tap your foot too loud, or you'll change the exchange rate." The table roars with laughter, and even Leonid smiles, though his mind is already rebalancing accounts. Humor softens danger, but it also hides truth. The flow of money here is as fragile as the reed in the saxophone, one crack away from silence. Many people still think that the underworld operated only in shadows, back alleys, and whispers. So what do you think? In reality, the city's nightlife became a camouflage. Music, liquor, and charm wrapped illegal deals in velvet. The saxophone was as important as the calculator, both ensuring no one outside the circle noticed what was really happening. Closer still, one night, as the band plays a tune nearly drowned by applause, Leonid watches a businessman push a folder across the table. Inside are wire transfer instructions, accounts scattered between Riga and Vienna. Leonid notes the sums with calm precision, then slides the folder back without a word. Around them, the audience cheers a trumpet solo, oblivious that a fortune has just been routed across Europe. These jazz bar meetings teach him something new: how to blend. In basements, his job was to count. Here, it is to disappear, to become another man with a drink in hand and a smile on his lips. He learns that the best bankers of the underworld do not stand out. They lean back, let the saxophone fill the silence, and wait for the numbers to arrive, written on napkins that vanish into ashtrays. When he leaves, coat collar raised against the night chill, he carries nothing but memory. And memory, for him, is enough. The precinct breathes like an oven. File cabinets hum with secrets, and overhead lights flicker as if tired of their own persistence. Leonid Bilunov steps carefully through these corridors, never loudly, never nervously, because he knows how fragile calm is when paper trails start to warm. Investigators in cheap suits begin to notice patterns. Too many companies with no workers, too many transfers routed through the same hands, too many coincidences stacked like cards. The first inquiry comes politely. A phone call, an invitation to clarify a few details. He arrives with a briefcase of documents prepared by lawyers, each page thick with stamps. He smiles, shakes hands, and speaks little. The investigators speak more, circling questions, hoping he will trip. But he doesn't. Years of balancing ledgers have taught him rhythm. He answers like a metronome, steady, predictable, leaving no room for suspicion to swell. A mainstream fact. Russian law enforcement in the early 2000s waged highly publicized campaigns against financial crime, often as much for show as for justice. High-profile cases filled newspapers, even as corruption blurred the edges of legality. Closer to Leonid, the fact is quieter. One investigator eyes him curiously, tapping a pen, remarking that his files are too clean, too neat. Even real banks make more mistakes, the man mutters. Leonid shrugs, pretending modesty, but inside he feels the praise like armor. Someone jokes once that police can only follow trails if they aren't paved over. Leonid retells the joke at a bar, earning chuckles, though he knows the truth is sharper. Trails can be disguised with the same care as balance sheets, and he has become an expert mason of financial roads. Many people still think that every officer could be bought, that bribes erased all danger. But Leonid knows better. Some can be paid, yes, but others pride themselves on being immovable, and still others use pressure as negotiation. So what do you think? Does money silence suspicion, or does it sharpen it when offered too quickly? Closer detail, Late one night, as snow dusts the city, Leonid is called to meet a senior officer in a restaurant. The man orders vodka, pours 2 glasses, then says nothing for nearly 5 minutes. Finally, he asks, "Are you clever enough to know when to stop?" Leonid sips slowly, feeling the trap in the question. He answers with a quiet line, "I stop when the numbers tell me to." The officer studies him, then nods once, leaving the implication floating in the cold air between them. From then on, Leonid learns to navigate not only ledgers, but also gazes. Investigators may not shout, but their silence can feel like an interrogation. He polishes his balance sheets, double-checks every transfer, and ensures that coincidences remain just plausible enough to survive scrutiny. In Moscow's neon night, he returns to counting rooms with an extra layer of caution, aware that somewhere in the precinct, his name might be penciled into a file waiting for ink. The northern port city lies under a sky of cranes, steel arms frozen in mid-motion like sentinels. Fog drifts over the docks, blending the smell of diesel, salt, and iron. For Leonid Bilunov, this port is less about ships and more about whispers. Here, containers arrive sealed, bills of lading shuffle like playing cards, and fortunes can hide behind a wall of metal boxes. He travels north at the urging of partners who say opportunities are better where customs officers look the other way. In smoky cafes near the waterfront, he listens to captains grumble about bribes, to brokers brag about routes that dodge inspection. The port hums at night, forklifts screeching against concrete, chains clattering like percussion in a symphony of commerce, both legal and otherwise. The mainstream fact: during the early 2000s, Russian ports were notorious entry points for smuggling, everything from cigarettes and alcohol to electronics and even arms. Customs corruption was endemic, and entire economies thrived in those gray zones. Closer to Leonid, the fact sharpens into a memory. He watches a customs officer accept an envelope without breaking stride, sliding it into his jacket like a man pocketing a receipt. Deals here test partnerships. Offshore papers are one thing, but moving physical goods requires faith. Faith that shipments will arrive, that guards will be paid, that competitors won't sabotage. Leonid learns to balance not only ledgers, but also trust, a commodity more volatile than rubles. A joke circulates among port workers. If you want to know what's in a container, ask the seagulls. They always arrive first. Leonid chuckles when he hears it, though his mind runs darker. He knows that sometimes the seagulls leave with nothing, and the men on shore leave with everything. Many people still think that smugglers lived in the shadows, far from respectable offices. But Leonid sees the opposite. Men with polished shoes, fluent in English, discussing shipping routes over espresso. So what do you think? Does the line between smuggler and businessman vanish when the paperwork looks the same? Closer detail. One night, he walks along the pier with a partner who points at a container marked with faded stencils. "That one," the man says softly, "contains nothing." Leonid frowns. "Nothing?" The man smiles. "Exactly. Nothing on paper, nothing in reality. But in between, it will be invoiced 3 times before dawn." Leonid laughs, not because it's funny, but because it is genius. He notes the figures, already imagining how the absence of cargo can weigh heavier than steel. The fog lifts slightly as dawn nears, revealing rows of ships waiting to unload. Leonid inhales the cold air, realizing that ports, like banks, live on circulation. Stop the flow, and everything rots. Keep it moving, even empty, and wealth multiplies. The city hums, and he hums with it. Another gear in the machinery of shadows. The Baltic corridors are narrow but alive with opportunity. Cities like Riga, Tallinn, and Vilnius hum with the sound of dial-up modems, clattering keyboards, and the hushed excitement of men who know how to turn gaps into rivers. Leonid Bilunov visits these places not for their architecture or their markets, but for the wire rooms hidden above electronics shops and behind internet cafes. He sees young men in leather jackets, fingers flying across keyboards as they clone cards, reroute transfers, and build networks invisible to police still learning how to spell cybercrime. Stacks of cheap prepaid phones litter the tables, each one destined for a single call, then tossed into the night. Leonid isn't there to code. He doesn't need to. His role is to observe the flow, to ensure that when money travels from account to account, it doesn't vanish into thin air, but lands exactly where the Obshchak demands. A mainstream fact. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the Baltic states became major hubs for carding operations and money laundering, exploiting their banking system's weaker oversight. Closer to Leonid, the fact is tactile. He runs his hand across a desk covered in phone cards, each one capable of hiding thousands of dollars with a single call. He shares a drink with a Latvian fixer who jokes, "We don't build bridges here. We just reroute rivers." Leonid smiles, appreciating the metaphor. To him, that is exactly what this work feels like. Redirecting streams of money so that they flow through unexpected valleys, carving paths unseen on any official map. Many people still think that cybercrime was the domain of reckless kids in basements, disconnected from the old guard. But Leonid witnesses the opposite. The same tattoos, the same codes, the same oaths, just newer tools. So what do you think? Does a criminal become less dangerous when he trades knives for keyboards? Or does the danger simply change shape, closer still? One night in Riga, Leonid steps into a dim apartment where the hum of servers replaces the hum of cash counters. A young carder, no older than 20, nervously hands him a ledger. Not a notebook, but a floppy disk. Leonid pockets it carefully, sensing the weight of digital gold. Later, as he reviews the files, he marvels that money can now travel invisibly, leaving no smudge of ink, no fingerprint of graphite. For the first time, he feels that the future of laundering may not even require envelopes or couriers. The corridors teach him adaptability. If Moscow's counting rooms were about order and the northern ports about trust, then the Baltics reveal speed. Transactions must move faster than suspicion. Accounts must close before questions open. Leonid learns to think not in days or hours, but in seconds. By the time he returns to Moscow, he carries with him not only methods, but also a new sense of time. The city still runs on neon and envelopes, but Leonid knows the wires stretching north and west hum with his numbers, moving unseen, faster than any train, faster than any chase. The Kremlin's mood changes like weather, sudden and unmistakable. By the mid-2000s, Russia is no longer content to let the wild capitalism of the 1990s run unchecked. Trials fill newspapers, oligarchs are summoned to account for their fortunes, and the state begins flexing muscles grown stronger with oil money. For Leonid Bilunov, this shift feels like a pressure front rolling in, a reminder that power always redraws the rules. He reads headlines over breakfast. High-profile tycoons arrested, their companies dismantled, their empires folded into state hands. The message is clear. Those who grew too fast or too bold now serve as examples. For men like Leonid, operating in the shadows, discretion becomes not just smart, but vital. He no longer walks into bars with laughter on his lips. He enters quietly, scanning faces, measuring who is listening. A mainstream fact. The early 2000s saw the Kremlin launch targeted prosecutions against oligarchs, most famously the arrest of Mikhail Khodorkovsky in 2003, signaling that private wealth had limits when it challenged state authority. Closer to Leonid, the fact is sharper. One of his associates, a mid-level banker with offshore ties, is summoned for questioning and returns pale, trembling, unwilling to speak. Within weeks, the man sells his apartment and disappears abroad. At one gathering, a Vory leans across the table and mutters, "Even the Tsar counts his coins. If he counts yours, make sure he finds nothing." Leonid nods, filing the advice away. From then on, he moves carefully, trimming his networks, closing unnecessary accounts, erasing footprints where he can. The joke he repeats to himself is half comfort, half warning. Better to be the banker no one sees than the tycoon everyone envies. Many people still think that the state's crackdown only touched the gilded few, the oligarchs on magazine covers. But Leonid feels the ripples reach even basements and counting rooms. So what do you think? When power shifts at the top, does it change the rules for everyone below, or only for those foolish enough to stand in the spotlight? The closer detail. One winter evening, he burns old files in a metal bin behind his office. Papers curl, edges blacken, numbers vanish into smoke. The glow reflects off his glasses, and he thinks of his father's fragile notebook from years ago. Numbers that once felt like salvation, now treated like contraband. He feels no nostalgia, only resolve. In this new climate, paper is liability. Memory must become his strongest vault. Discretion becomes his most profitable skill. He avoids displays, keeps his lifestyle modest, refuses to appear in photographs. While others boast of yachts and villas, Leonid settles into shadows, learning that invisibility is the highest form of wealth. The Kremlin may hunt giants, but it cannot swat a ghost. The walls close in with new sharpness. Banking laws, once porous, begin to harden. International pressure mounts, and Moscow introduces anti-laundering measures meant to signal modernity to the world. Smaller banks, those cozy corners where Leonid Bilunov once shuffled sums with little scrutiny, start collapsing under inspections. Windows he once slipped through close with a sudden snap, leaving the smell of scorched opportunity. He notices the change first in paperwork. A familiar manager at a neighborhood bank apologizes, saying new compliance officers now demand explanations for deposits over certain thresholds. Forms multiply. Signatures are required twice, sometimes 3 times. What used to be a friendly nod becomes a checklist. Leonid doesn't panic. He adapts. He begins fragmenting flows, spreading transactions thinner across more accounts. Slower but safer. The mainstream fact. By the mid-2000s, Russia introduced stricter banking regulations under international pressure, joining bodies like the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, to combat money laundering. Dozens of smaller banks were shut down, accused of serving as laundromats for illicit flows. Closer to Leonid, the fact is vivid. One morning, he arrives at a familiar branch to find its doors locked, shutters down, a paper notice fluttering in the wind. He turns away, calm on the surface, but inside, he feels the rhythm of his trade changing. A colleague jokes nervously, "Soon we'll need passports, just to buy bread." The table laughs, but Leonid hears the truth beneath. He knows every new rule is a rope tightening. Jokes can't loosen knots. Many people still think that compliance is mere theater, meant to satisfy Western observers. So, what do you think? For men like Leonid, the theater is dangerous precisely because the audience is global. Even if enforcement is inconsistent, the stage lights reveal shadows that once went unseen. The closer detail comes late one evening when he pores over contracts in his flat. Red stamps mark documents like bruises, each one a warning. He lights a cigarette, exhales slowly, and begins rewriting his playbook. He leans heavier on foreign structures, moves cash further from Moscow, and reduces visible footprints. Where once speed was his pride, now patience becomes his ally. He learns a subtle lesson. Survival is not about outrunning the rules, but about outlasting them. Let the smaller players panic. Let careless men brag. Leonid retreats into layers of silence. He trims his network to a skeleton crew, closes weak accounts, and stores knowledge in memory instead of files. The black banker is still counting, but now he counts under dimmer lights, behind thicker curtains. The city, as always, hums around him. Neon glows, trains rattle, bars fill with laughter. But Leonid feels the hum shift, a new key in the background, and he adjusts accordingly. For him, adaptation is not choice. It is currency. It happens suddenly, as such cracks often do. A courier, young, nervous, always sweating too much, fails to hold his silence. Dragged into a precinct on a minor charge, he panics under fluorescent light and begins to talk. He doesn't reveal everything, but enough. Names, meeting places, routes that were never supposed to be repeated outside trusted rooms. By dawn, the word spreads. One man's fear has shifted the ground beneath them all. Leonid Bilunov learns of it through a single phone call. The voice on the other end doesn't raise its tone. It simply says, "He spoke." Those two words force Leonid to act. Files are shredded, accounts are frozen, phones are swapped. He moves quickly, discarding numbers he's memorized for years, paring his contact book down until it feels skeletal. In the span of hours, his carefully built network becomes slimmer, tighter, designed to survive scrutiny. A mainstream fact. Law enforcement in early 2000s Russia increasingly relied on compromised insiders, couriers, accountants, low-level fixers, whose testimonies could open investigations otherwise impossible to build. Closer to Leonid, the fact is sharper. He sits at his desk at 3 a.m, burning through packs of cigarettes, rewriting routes of money in his head, ensuring no one strand of evidence can trace directly back to him. There is a bitter joke among his circle. You can trust a courier until he meets a policeman with bad coffee. The laugh is hollow, but Leonid allows himself a thin smile. He knows it's true. Trust breaks not with violence, but with exhaustion, with fear in a bright-lit room. Many people still think that betrayal in the underworld always comes from rivals hungry for power, but Leonid knows otherwise. More often, it comes from the weakest link, the frightened man cornered with nothing to lose. So what do you think? Does loyalty mean anything if silence can be bought by fear? Closer still. One evening, Leonid stands in his office surrounded by empty drawers. He has destroyed more paper in a night than he produced in a year. He touches the charred edges of a burned ledger, the numbers half visible, then crumbling into ash. The ritual feels almost cleansing. The network is smaller now, but leaner, easier to guard. Relocation follows. Addresses change. Safe flats are abandoned. and a new one is rented under another name. He carries with him only a single suitcase of clothes and a mind full of numbers. The black banker understands now that survival is not about expansion, but contraction. Cutting away until only the core remains unbreakable. By the time morning light filters through the curtains, Leonid sits quietly, sipping cold tea, listening to the city outside. Somewhere, the courier is still speaking, still unraveling threads. But Leonid is already 2 steps ahead, his world narrower, sharper, and more dangerous. London greets him not with neon, but with rain. The drizzle soaks the pavements of Knightsbridge, dripping from awnings above polished shop fronts. Leonid Bilunov slips into this world with the same careful silence he used in Moscow's basements. Here, money has a different perfume, no longer ink and cigarettes, but cologne and polished leather. Doorways open politely to men who arrive with wealth, even if that wealth has traveled through shadows. He rents a flat with curtains thick enough to mute the city, and each morning, he walks past cafes where bankers sip espresso, speaking in clipped English about markets and mergers. He listens, understanding just enough to know that their games are no less ruthless than the ones he left behind. The difference is the vocabulary. Here they call it tax efficiency, not laundering. The mainstream fact: during the 2000s, London became infamous as a magnet for Russian capital, much of it arriving through opaque offshore structures. Mansions in Mayfair and apartments in Knightsbridge were bought with funds whose origins no one cared to probe. Closer to Leonid, the fact is specific. He sits in a solicitor's office, watching as contracts are drawn up in elegant English, securing property under companies that exist only on paper. The solicitor smiles warmly, never asking where the money comes from. At a dinner once, a British acquaintance jokes, "The rain here washes money cleaner than any laundromat." The table laughs, and Leonid allows himself a chuckle. He knows it is not far from the truth. Many people still think that moving abroad severs ties with the old world. But Leonid feels the opposite. Moscow calls him through late-night phone buzzes, offshore accounts hum in his ear, and the Obstchak still expects its cut. So what do you think? Can a man truly leave when the shadow travels with him, stitched into every transfer? Closer detail. One gray afternoon, he stands at a Knightsbridge window, watching umbrellas drift below. On his desk lies a briefcase with documents for yet another property purchase, the kind meant to hide money in square footage. But his eyes linger not on the papers, but on the rain streaking the glass. He remembers Moscow fog, Riga apartments, northern ports. The geography changes, but the pattern does not. Money flows. He follows. London becomes an interlude, a pause between storms. The city offers quiet restaurants, discreet accountants, and the illusion of legitimacy. Yet Leonid knows illusions fade. For him, this chapter is not escape, but camouflage, another layer of silence before the next demand knocks on his door. The year 2008 arrives like a glass shattering on marble. Markets seize, credit freezes, and men who once bragged of infinite liquidity now wring their hands in panic. Leonid Bilunov watches from his London flat as television screens flash with red graphs, as anchors speak of collapse with theatrical dread. For him, the shock is not in the numbers. He has seen worse in Moscow's 1990s, but in how fragile the illusion of safety proves to be. Phone calls grow frantic. Partners in Moscow demand reassurance. Offshore brokers mutter about vanishing liquidity. deals stall mid-transfer, leaving funds suspended between jurisdictions, neither here nor there. Leonid sits at his desk, calculator still, cigarette burning in the ashtray, listening to the silence that follows a question no one can answer. Where's the money now? The mainstream fact: the 2008 global financial crisis devastated markets worldwide, sending shockwaves through Russia's economy as oil prices collapsed and capital fled. Closer to Leonid, the fact is personal. One of his London bank accounts, once reliable, suddenly limits withdrawals. He walks into the branch, speaks politely, and is told that temporary restrictions are in place. The word temporary feels like a knife against his ribs. Jokes continue, even in crisis. A colleague quips, "We thought we built empires, but it turns out we only built card houses." Leonid allows himself a small grin, but does not repeat the line. For him, empires and card houses were always the same thing. It is only others who forgot. Many people still think that the crisis was an equalizer, that all players suffered alike. But Leonid sees otherwise. Those who relied on institutions suffer most. Those who relied on shadows adapt. So what do you think? Was the safer bet the polished banker in a glass tower, or the black banker scribbling in candlelight? Closer detail. During those weeks, he meets a Moscow partner in a quiet Knightsbridge restaurant. The man orders soup but doesn't touch it, hands trembling as he asks if the obshchak will survive. Leonid leans forward, calm as ever, and replies, "Numbers don't vanish, they only hide. Our job is to know where." His voice steadies the man, though Leonid himself feels the tremor of uncertainty deep inside. The crisis tests his friendships as much as his accounts. Some partners disappear, fleeing to villas abroad. Others call daily, begging for help. Leonid learns which ties were built on loyalty and which on convenience. By the time markets stabilize months later, his circle is smaller, leaner, and his own reputation stronger. The black banker is not broken by crisis. He is tempered by it, hardened like steel cooled too quickly. As the world slowly exhales, Leonid leans back in his chair, knowing that survival is not about predicting storms, but about standing still when the winds rage loudest. Paper becomes his battlefield. After the financial crisis, regulators, creditors, and rivals all demand answers. What once could be settled with a handshake or a whisper now requires folders, signatures, and long hours in offices where the air tastes of stale coffee and toner ink. For Leonid Bilunov, adrenaline transforms into paperwork, and silence into statements carefully rehearsed. Civil suits arrive like autumn leaves, drifting onto his desk one after another. A creditor claims he mishandled funds. A partner alleges he withheld profit. Lawyers translate accusations into dense paragraphs, while Leonid sits quietly, reading every line as if it were another ledger. He knows that behind each page lies not truth, but pressure. Pressure designed to extract, to weaken, to force a settlement. A mainstream fact. The post-2008 years saw a surge in litigation surrounding Russian capital abroad as investors turned on each other, seeking restitution for vanished billions. London courts in particular became battlegrounds for disputes between former allies. Closer to Leonid, the fact is specific. He spends long afternoons with solicitors who ask him to recount transactions from memory. He answers with precision, recalling dates, amounts, even the smell of the rooms where deals were struck. They marvel at his recall, but he knows it is necessity, not talent. At one meeting, a junior lawyer jokes, "If you ever tire of banking, you could lecture at Oxford on offshore structures." The room chuckles. Leonid smirks faintly. Inside, though, he notes how strange it feels to be praised for crimes disguised as scholarship. Many people still think that courtrooms are arenas of truth, where facts emerge clear and final. But Leonid sees them as theaters where each side stages a play with scripts written in legalese. So, what do you think? Is justice found in the evidence or in the performance? Closer still. During one deposition, he feels sweat bead under his collar as a barrister presses him on a transfer that passed through Riga. He pauses just long enough to seem thoughtful, then replies with an answer so bland it carries no scent of danger. The barrister sighs, sensing he will get nothing sharper. Later, Leonid tells himself that blandness is as powerful a shield as denial. He learns to wield patience. Where others rage or panic, he sits still, hands folded, voice measured. He accepts that much of his time now belongs to paper and process, not to neon or counting rooms. It is less thrilling, perhaps, but just as dangerous. Mistakes here don't lead to fists or knives. They lead to frozen accounts, seized assets, reputations undone by a single phrase recorded in transcript. By the time the suits thin out, Leonid emerges not untouched, but unbroken. He has spent years turning pressure into paperwork, and in the process, he has discovered a new kind of strength. Endurance not of muscle or firepower, but of silence stretched across endless pages. The quiet weight of distance grows heavier than any briefcase of cash. By the late 2000s, Leonid Bilunov lives half in Moscow's memory and half in London's drizzle. But his family exists somewhere in between, always close enough to reach by phone, never close enough to touch. He sends wire transfers instead of embraces, receipts instead of time. Birthdays arrive as numbers typed on a transfer slip, anniversaries as parcels shipped across borders. He calls when he can. The line crackles with delay, voices faint, laughter hollow when filtered through wires. His children speak of school projects, holidays, small triumphs he cannot witness. He listens intently, nodding though they cannot see him, jotting notes on a pad so he can remember details for the next call. This is how he stays present, through lists, through memory, through money. A mainstream fact, countless Russian businessmen in the 2000s relocated wealth and lives abroad, often leaving families divided by visas, travel restrictions, and fear of scrutiny. Closer to Leonid, the fact is intimate. One evening he hears his daughter ask, "Papa, when will you come back?" He pauses, staring at the dark window, before answering softly, "Soon." He knows the word is a promise he cannot schedule. At dinner with associates, someone jokes that distance makes families fonder, because absence is cheaper than presence. The table laughs, glasses clink. Leonid smiles politely, but inside, the humor bruises. He knows money cannot replace presence. It can only plaster cracks until the wall crumbles anyway. Many people still think that men like him care little for family, that business consumes every affection. But Leonid carries his guilt like another ledger, one that never balances. So what do you think? Is duty fulfilled by provision, or is it measured in footsteps across a child's room? Closer detail. On a gray London morning, he wires money for his son's tuition, then sits staring at the confirmation slip. He folds it carefully, slides it into his wallet, and carries it for weeks. Not because he needs proof, but because the paper feels like a surrogate hug. Every time he touches it, he imagines it reaching across distance, closing a gap he cannot cross. The silence of separation becomes part of his life. He drinks tea alone, writes notes in ledgers no one else will read, and fills the empty flat with the hum of the refrigerator. Moscow is behind him, family is far from him, and London is only a shell. For the black banker, numbers remain his constant companions, but they cannot answer back when he whispers good night. In every circle, there is always another man who smiles too wide. For Leonid Bilunov, that rival emerges slowly, a banker cut from similar cloth but stitched with sharper edges. This man dresses better, talks louder, and cultivates the kind of charm that wins friends easily. He arrives at tables already laughing, orders expensive wine before anyone else speaks, and places his hand on shoulders as if he already owns the room. At first, Leonid dismisses him as flash, a performer in a world that values discretion. But soon, he notices the man's ledgers stretch far, his contacts deeper than expected. Business flows through him like current through copper. Rivals begin to whisper that there is now another black banker, one who smiles as he signs, the mainstream fact. Russian financial networks abroad were notoriously competitive, with parallel structures often overlapping in the same cities, forcing constant maneuvering. Closer to Leonid, the fact feels personal. One afternoon, he learns that a longtime partner has shifted accounts to this rival, drawn in by promises of faster returns. The sting isn't financial, it's reputational. Trust, once lost, rarely returns. A joke spreads among associates. Why keep one banker when you can double your black? The laughter grates. Leonid forces a grin, but inside he notes every defection, every subtle shift of loyalty. Many people still think that rivalry in this sphere always explodes into open violence. So what do you think? Can a war fought in ledgers cut deeper than one fought with bullets? For Leonid, the danger lies not in blood spilled, but in balance sheets undermined, in credibility chipped away transaction by transaction. Closer detail. One evening in London, he passes the rival in a restaurant foyer. The man smiles, claps him on the back, and says warmly, "There's enough for both of us." Leonid smiles too, replying softly, "There's never enough silence." They part ways, their words polite, but the tension heavier than any suitcase of cash. From then on, Leonid shifts to defense. He double-checks every flow, cross-verifies every client, and trims weak branches from his network. He learns to guard not only against police, not only against betrayal, but against mirrors, men who look like him, act like him, but would gladly inherit his name. For Leonid, rivalry becomes a quiet duel. Smiles mask blades, ledgers mask battles. And though the city moves on, rain falling, neon glowing, he knows each handshake may conceal a hand closing into a fist. The ledger becomes a diary with two lives. By day, Leonid Bilunov writes columns of numbers in tidy ink, formatted for auditors, neat enough to survive a subpoena. By night, he turns to another book, or sometimes just to memory, where the same sums are written in a different hand, marked with initials and codes only he can decipher. Two inks, two truths, one man holding both. He learns to live in these parallel lines. When bankers ask for reports, he provides charts that gleam with legitimacy. When the Obshchak demands its share, he calculates from the shadow column, careful that nothing bleeds from one into the other. The art lies not in hiding money, but in ensuring that each truth looks complete when viewed alone. The mainstream fact. Double booking is a practice as old as commerce itself, but in Russia's early 2000s financial underworld, it became a survival mechanism. balancing demands of legality with the codes of Vory v. Zakon. Closer to Leonid, the fact is intimate. He keeps one slim notebook tucked in a drawer beneath his socks, its pages filled with numbers that would ruin him if ever read by the wrong eyes. He jokes once with a confidant, "My life is written in carbon copy, the legal sheet on top, the real story underneath." The confidant chuckles, though Leonid feels no humor in it. To him, the joke is merely a truth disguised. Many people still think that deception is a matter of lies told outright, but Leonid knows it is often the opposite. It is truth presented in fragments, each shard polished until it blinds the viewer. So, what do you think? Does honesty exist if no one ever sees the whole ledger? Closer still. One night, unable to sleep, he spreads both notebooks across his kitchen table. Rain taps the window, the city murmurs outside, and he stares at the twin records of his life. The ink gleams differently, blue on one, black on the other. He wonders which book is his real self, which set of numbers truly defines him. The thought unsettles him more than police raids or rival smiles ever could. From then on, the ritual deepens. Each time he balances the two ledgers, he whispers a line to himself. One for them, one for me. It becomes a mantra, a lullaby, a reminder that survival depends on keeping the inks separate, and yet, in the quiet hours, he feels the weight of the deception pressing down like a second shadow. He is the black banker, trusted to count without error. But he knows the greatest miscalculation of all would be to forget which ledger is which. Settlements replaced threats, and the rhythm of Leonid Bilunov's world shifts again. Where once a dispute meant whispered warnings or shadowy men on stairwells, now it begins with lawyers drafting letters and ends with signatures exchanged across polished tables. Arbitration, not assassination, becomes the new currency of peace. He sits in conference rooms with panoramic windows, the Thames or the Moskva stretching beyond the glass. Opposite him are men who might once have ordered bullets, but now speak through barristers in measured tones. The disputes remain the same: shares, debts, broken promises. But the language changes. Instead of fists pounding tables, there are phrases like "without prejudice" and "amicable resolution." Leonid learns to translate rage into clauses, fear into compensation, betrayal into settlement, the mainstream fact. By the 2010s, arbitration courts in London and other financial hubs became the primary battleground for Russian businessmen and their disputes, reflecting a shift from physical to legal confrontation. Closer to Leonid, the fact is personal. He once watches two rivals, men who had once threatened each other with blades, calmly initial a document agreeing to divide profits like gentlemen. The irony tastes bitter, but it saves lives. Someone at one of these sessions cracks a dry joke. Cheaper to pay the lawyer than the undertaker. The table chuckles, and Leonid allows himself a faint smile. It is not humor that soothes him, but the realization that even killers can be civilized by the weight of paperwork. Many people still think that crime remains forever violent, that the language of blood cannot be replaced. So what do you think? Does a settlement inked on paper carry less gravity than one written in fear? For Leonid, both seal silence. Only the tools differ. Closer still, one late evening, he reviews a draft settlement alone, pen poised above the final line. Outside, the city glows with office lights burning past midnight. He hesitates, recalling the old counting rooms, the smell of ink and rubber bands. Signing here feels different. It is not obedience to the Obstschak, nor service to clients, but an acknowledgement that the rules have changed for good. He signs anyway, slowly, and the pen scratch echoes louder than any gunshot. In these moments, Leonid begins to believe that peace has its own economy, one not built on fear, but on fatigue. Men grow tired of threats, of endless battles, and they learn to price silence in currency that doesn't spill blood. For the black banker, this shift is not surrender, it is evolution. He remains the same at his core, a man balancing two columns. Only now, one is marked by numbers, and the other by signatures. The dream of a clean exit creeps into his thoughts like a quiet guest who never leaves. After years of basements, ledgers, and whispered transfers, Leonid Bilunov begins to imagine mornings without phone calls, without couriers, without the weight of invisible money pressing on his chest. The idea seems almost absurd. Ordinary life, coffee brewed without urgency, newspapers read without scanning for coded warnings. He starts small. A portion of funds is moved into legitimate ventures, cafes, construction firms, even a shipping business with real cranes and real workers. For once, the returns are modest, even boring. He finds himself oddly soothed by the sight of honest invoices, stamped with nothing but mundane approval. He tells himself this is the beginning, the path toward mornings where his name no longer needs to hide behind layers of silence. A mainstream fact. Many figures of Russia's underworld in the 2000s and 2010s sought to go clean, investing in legitimate industries to secure stability for their families and shield themselves from prosecution. Closer to Leonid, the fact is tender. He buys a small seaside property, nothing extravagant, where he imagines waking to waves instead of alarms. He walks through the empty rooms, runs his hand along the cool plaster walls, and feels for the first time in years that perhaps the exit isn't fantasy. Friends tease him. At a dinner, one quips, "The black banker wants to become a white accountant." The laughter is easy, good-natured, but Leonid only smiles thinly. He knows the hardest part of leaving isn't cutting ties with money. It's convincing the shadows to release their claim. Many people still think that men like him never truly retire, that the underworld keeps its servants until death. So what do you think? Can a man fold his past neatly away, or will it always bleed through the seams? Closer detail. One night, he sits alone at his seaside property, waves murmuring beyond the window. He pours himself tea, listens to the hush of the tide, and thinks about numbers. Not of millions moving offshore, but of simple expenses, groceries, maintenance, taxes. The simplicity almost makes him laugh. He imagines explaining it to the younger version of himself, the boy with a calculator under his pillow, and wonders if that boy would believe the piece is worth the price. The dream lingers, growing clearer. For Leonid, the clean exit is not about wealth. It is about silence. And silence, at last, feels like the only fortune worth chasing. Dinner smells of dill, bread, and tobacco. In a quiet apartment above Moscow, a table is set not with contracts or ledgers, but with plates of steaming stew and glasses of vodka that catch the dim light. Around it sit men whose skin is lined with ink, their knuckles and shoulders bearing the codes of the Vory Zakon. Leonid Bilunov joins them, not as an equal in tattoos, but as a man who carries another kind of mark. The reputation of the black banker. The conversation is careful, wrapped in ritual. No one interrupts when another speaks. Glasses are raised with solemn nods, never with careless clinks. The old code breathes in the pauses, in the way silence stretches before laughter is allowed. Here, no one flaunts wealth. No one boasts of villas or cars. Instead, they speak of loyalty, of debts honored, of rules preserved even in an age when money moves faster than tradition. The mainstream fact: Vory gatherings were bound by ritual and hierarchy, their codes forbidding ostentation and demanding respect for communal funds and shared silence. Closer to Leonid, the fact is immediate. He watches one older man trace a finger across his own faded tattoo, explaining in low tones that the ink is not decoration, but a lifetime oath. Leonid listens, respectful, aware that his power lies in numbers, theirs in symbols, yet both are bound to the same invisible law. A joke slips in after the third glass. Someone mutters, "Even the banker can't calculate the price of betrayal." The table chuckles, eyes sliding toward Leonid with sly amusement. He smirks faintly, replying only, "That's why we never sell it." The line earns nods, the kind of approval more valuable than applause. Many people still think that these meetings are relics, old men clinging to obsolete rules. But Leonid sees otherwise. The code, though frayed, still binds the room tighter than money ever could. So what do you think? Is a tradition weaker when it bends, or stronger for surviving in disguise? Closer still, Leonid notices the quiet ritual at the end of the meal. Plates are cleared, glasses emptied, and one man recites a brief oath to the obshchak. It is not dramatic, not loud, but its weight fills the room. Leonid bows his head slightly, though he has no ink on his skin. In his own way, through ledgers and transfers, he has already lived that vow. The dinner ends late. Outside, the city hums with modern life, neon buzzing, taxis rushing past. But inside, the table lingers in his memory. He realizes that even as banks tighten rules and rivals sharpen smiles, the old codes still stand, stubborn as stone. And he, the black banker, has learned to balance both, the silence of tradition and the noise of the market. The sea air tastes different from city fog. Leonid Bilunov stands on a dim coast, far from Moscow's neon and London's drizzle, watching waves collapse against the shore with the patience of centuries. He no longer counts bills, no longer tallies ledgers, at least not aloud. Instead, he measures the rhythm of tides, noting how the water retreats and returns, always reliable, always exact. Numbers still comfort him, only now they are written in salt and horizon. His mornings begin with silence. A kettle whistles, tea steams, and no phones interrupt the ritual. He sits by the window, staring at the shifting light over the water, imagining each ripple as a transaction closed, each wave a settlement renewed. The old tension, precinct interrogations, rival smiles, couriers trembling, feels like another life, preserved in ledgers he no longer opens. A mainstream fact: by the 2010s, many former underworld financiers vanished from public record, their stories dissolving into rumor. Some claimed exile, others whispered of quiet retirements. Closer to Leonid, the fact is this: he walks the shore alone, leaving footprints that the tide erases within minutes. For the first time in decades, he finds comfort in being forgotten. Someone once joked to him that bankers never retire, they just change their currency. He remembers the line now with a wry smile. His new currency is quiet. Each evening, he counts not rubles, but waves, not profits, but hours of peace unbroken by knocks at the door. Many people still think that men like him can never escape the gravity of their past. So what do you think? Does silence redeem or merely hide? Leonid does not answer, even to himself. He simply walks the shoreline, steady, unhurried, as though each step were another entry in a final invisible ledger. Closer still. One twilight, he sits by a fire on the beach, driftwood crackling, stars surfacing above. He whispers a single phrase, "No more ledgers." The waves take it, carry it outward, until the sound belongs to no one. For Leonid, that feels like balance, the kind he chased through basements, ports, corridors, and courts. Balance not of books, but of breath. And so, the black banker fades into the rhythm of the sea, leaving behind stories carried by rumor and silence carried by tide. Now, as the story softens, let the pace slow with the hush of waves still in your mind. Imagine the shoreline stretching endlessly, its sand cool beneath bare feet, the horizon drawn in gentle strokes of gray and blue. Each wave that rises and falls carries away noise, worry, and the heavy numbers that once filled ledgers. You are left with nothing to tally but the rhythm of your own breathing, steady and calm. Picture Leonid's quiet walks by the sea, not as tales of crime or calculation, but as small lessons in release. He no longer needs to balance accounts. He simply watches the ocean balance itself, perfectly and endlessly. The tide recedes, and it returns. The pattern never fails, and its certainty is enough. Let that certainty settle in you too, the comfort of cycles that keep their promise. The city's neon, the counting rooms, the smoky bars, all fade now, like dreams that vanish in daylight. What remains is the slow sweep of water against stone, the muted colors of dusk, the silence of an evening free of obligation. Here, there is no need for vigilance, no need for haste. Only stillness, only the quiet hum of life continuing gently, whether or not anyone is watching. Breathe with that rhythm. Let your shoulders drop, let your jaw unclench, and feel the body sink deeper into rest. The story has traveled far, across borders and years, but now it drifts into calm waters, where nothing is required of you but to let go. So close your eyes. Listen inwardly for the sound of the tide, and let sleep take you as smoothly as the sea reclaims the shore.